They say silence is the loudest scream, but in the Coleman mansion, silence was the only weapon Lysander had left. As the movers stripped the paintings from the walls and her stepmother laughed over champagne, Lysander stood in the corner, clutching a rusted iron key, the only thing her father had left her. Everyone thought she was weak. Everyone thought she was defeated. But they didn't know what the judge was about to read. They didn't know that her father, a man who saw everything, had set a trap 30 years in the making. And when the gavel finally fell, it wasn't just money that changed hands. It was a life sentence of regret for anyone who had underestimated her. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime stick harder. It was a fitting backdrop for the funeral of Andrew Coleman, a man who had built a shipping empire from a single fishing boat and died wondering if anyone in his house actually loved him. Lysander Coleman stood by the graveside, her black coat soaked through to the shoulders. She didn't open an umbrella. She didn't cry. She just watched as the mahogany casket was lowered into the wet earth. To her left, standing under a massive silk-lined canopy tent, were Brenda and Jared. Brenda Andrews' second wife of 10 years was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief that probably cost more than Lysander's car. Jared, Brenda's son from a previous marriage, was checking his watch. He was 32, wore a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, and had the restless energy of a man who was about to inherit millions he hadn't earned. "It's taking too long," Jared muttered loud enough for the priest to pause his benediction. "The reception starts at 4. The caterers charge overtime." "Hush, darling," Brenda whispered, though she didn't look at the grave. She was looking at Lysander. Her gaze was predatory, a shark assessing a wounded seal. "Let the girl have her moment. It's the last thing she'll get from this family." Lysander heard them. She always heard them. For 10 years since she was 12, and Andrew had brought Brenda home, Lysander had learned the art of invisibility. She had learned that speaking up only gave them ammunition, and fighting back only amused them. So she had perfected the silence. When the service ended, Lysander placed a single white rose on the casket. "Goodbye, Dad," she whispered. "I kept my promise." She turned to leave, but Jared stepped in her path. He was smiling, a cruel twisting of lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't bother coming back to the main house, Lyd," Jared said, buttoning his jacket. "Mother and I have a lot of inventory to do. We don't want you getting in the way. The guest cottage is unlocked. You can stay there until the end of the week. Then, well, you know." "Jared, be polite," Brenda chided, drifting over. She placed a hand on Lysander's arm, her nails digging in slightly. "We're just overwhelmed with grief, Lysander. You understand. The estate is complex. We need to secure the assets. Andrew would have wanted us to be prudent." Lysander looked at Brenda's hand, then up at her face. She didn't pull away. She didn't scream that she had been the one changing Andrew's IV bags for the last 6 months, while Brenda was vacationing in Aspen. She didn't scream that Jared hadn't visited the hospital once. "I understand," Lysander said softly. Her voice was steady, void of the tremor they wanted to hear. Brenda blinked, disappointed by the lack of a scene. She pulled her hand away. "Right. Well. Friday, Lysander. Have your things out." They climbed into the waiting limousine, the tires spinning mud onto Lysander's shoes as they sped away. Lysander walked to her battered sedan, the engine coughing to life with a reluctant sputter. She drove back to the Coleman estate, not to the mansion on the hill, but to the small, drafty guest cottage near the gatehouse where she had been relegated 2 years ago, when Brenda decided she needed a sewing room. From her window she watched the lights blaze to life in the main house. It looked like a party. By the next morning, the trucks had arrived. They weren't moving trucks. They were auction house transports. Sotheby's, Christie's, specialized antique dealers. Lysander sat on the porch of the cottage, a mug of cold coffee in her hands, watching the parade of her father's life being carried out in bubble wrap. There went the 19th century grandfather clock Andrew used to wind every Sunday. There went the portrait of Lysander's biological mother, covered casually with a moving blanket. There went the collection of vintage maritime compasses. Jared stood in the driveway, holding a clipboard, barking orders at men twice his age. "Careful with that," he shouted, as two men hauled out a heavy oak desk. "That's French Regency. If you scratch it, you bought it." Lysander stood up. That desk wasn't just furniture. In the bottom drawer her father had kept his journals, dozens of them. He wrote in them every night. She walked up the driveway. It was the first time she had approached the main house since the death. Jared saw her coming and puffed out his chest. "I told you to stay in the cottage," he snapped. "The desk," Lysander said, pointing. "Is it empty?" "What? Did you empty the drawers, Jared?" Jared rolled his eyes. "Of course I emptied the drawers. What do you think I am, an amateur? It was full of trash, old papers, broken pens, some dusty notebooks." Lysander's heart hammered against her ribs. "Where are the notebooks?" "Trash," Jared said, gesturing to a massive industrial dumpster sitting near the garage. Everything that wasn't silver gold or art went in there. "We're decluttering." Lysander looked at the dumpster. It was already half full of black bags. "You threw away his journals." They were ramblings of a senile old man. Brenda's voice came from the porch. She was wearing a silk kimono holding a mimosa. "Don't look at me like that, Lysander. We're doing you a favor, cleaning up the mess so the estate can be liquidated. You should be thanking us. The faster we sell, the faster we can move on." Lysander didn't answer. She walked past Jared, past the movers, and climbed into the dumpster. "Oh my God." Brenda laughed, pulling out her phone. "Look at her. A raccoon digging in the trash. Jared, get a picture. This is priceless." Jared laughed, snapping a photo. "Dig away, Lyd. Maybe you'll find a quarter." Lysander ignored the smell of wet cardboard and old coffee grounds. She tore open bag after bag until she saw the familiar leather bindings. She gathered them up, 12 notebooks in total, and clutched them to her chest. Her coat was smeared with grime. Her hands were shaking. She climbed out of the dumpster holding the books like they were gold bars. "Pathological," Brenda sneered, taking a sip of her drink. "Absolutely pathological." Lysander looked at them one last time. She wanted to scream. She wanted to burn the house down. But she remembered her father's voice, raspy and weak in those final days. "Patience, Lyd. The loudest man in the room is the one with the most to hide. Watch them. Let them eat. The check comes at the end of the meal." She turned and walked back to the cottage, the sound of Brenda's laughter following her like a ghost. 3 days later, the summons came. It wasn't a polite invitation. It was a legal mandate from the offices of Pines, Gentry and Associates. The reading was held in a high-rise, downtown, in a conference room, with a view of the Puget Sound, the very water Andrew Coleman had conquered. Lysander arrived early. She wore a simple grey dress, the only formal thing she owned that wasn't black. She sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. 10 minutes later, Brenda and Jared swept in. They were dressed as if they were attending a gala. Brenda wore a Chanel suit. Jared was in bespoke Italian wool. They brought their own lawyer, a man named Mr. Croker, who looked like a bulldog in a tie. "Let's get this over with," Brenda said, tossing her purse onto the table. "I have a realtor meeting at 2. We're listing the mansion for $12 million. The door at the head of the room opened, and Mr. Geoffrey Pines walked in. He was an ancient man, Andrew's attorney for 40 years. He moved slowly, his back bent, but his eyes were sharp, glittering with a hard steel intelligence behind thick glasses. He carried a single thick manila envelope. He sat down, adjusting his spectacles. He looked at Brenda, then at Jared, and finally his gaze rested on Lysander. He offered her a barely perceptible nod. "Good morning," Mr. Pines said. His voice was dry as parchment. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Andrew James Coleman." "We know why we're here, Geoffrey," Brenda snapped. "Just read the damn thing. We know the standard split. 50% to the spouse, remainder to the children. Andrew Coleman executed this will 3 weeks prior to his death," Mr. Pines said calmly. Brenda froze. 3 weeks? That's impossible. He was bedridden. He was on morphine. "He was of sound mind, Mrs. Coleman. I recorded the session myself with 2 witnesses and a neurologist present to certify his capacity. Would you like to challenge that before we begin?" Brenda's mouth clamped shut. She waved a hand dismissively. "Proceed." Mr. Pines broke the seal on the envelope. The sound of tearing paper was the only noise in the room. "I, Andrew Coleman, being of sound mind, do hereby make this my last will and testament." Mr. Pines read through the legalese. He listed the charitable donations, first significant sums to the Seafarers Union and the local hospice. Brenda tapped her acrylic nails on the table, impatient. "Article 4, the estate," Mr. Pines read. Everyone leaned forward. "To my wife, Brenda Coleman, I leave the primary residence at 440 Skyline Drive, along with its contents, excluding items specifically mentioned elsewhere. I also leave the contents of the joint checking account at Chase Bank, totaling $400,000. Brenda let out a breath she had been holding. She smiled, turning to Jared. "See the house? That's the big ticket." "To my stepson, Jared," Pines continued. "I leave my collection of vintage automobiles currently valued at $2 million, provided he maintains them." Jared pumped his fist. "Yes, the Shelby Cobra is mine." Lysander sat silently. Her hands were folded in her lap. She expected nothing. She knew how persuasive Brenda could be. "And to my daughter Lysander Coleman." "Miss Edson..." Mr. Pines paused. He looked up from the paper, his expression unreadable. Brenda smirked. "Here it comes. The scraps." "I leave the sum of $10,000, Mr. Pines read. Lysander flinched. It was involuntary. $10,000. It was a lot of money to some, but compared to the millions her father possessed, it was a slap in the face. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the message. Had he really valued her so little? "Furthermore," Mr. Pines continued, "I leave to Lysander the contents of my personal safety deposit box at First National, the key to which is in my possession. And finally, I leave her the ownership of the property located at 892 Oak Street." Jared burst out laughing. "Oak Street? You mean that old warehouse downtown?" "That place is a dump. It's condemned, isn't it?" "It is a dilapidated structure," Mr. Pines admitted. "However, it is the sole property of Lysander Coleman, effective immediately." Brenda was glowing. She had the mansion, the cash, the liquid assets. Jared had the cars. Lysander had 10 grand and a rotting building. "Is that it?" Brenda asked, standing up. "There is one final clause," Mr. Pines said. His voice dropped an octave. The conduct clause. Brenda sat back down slowly. What? Andrew was very specific, Mr. Pines said. The liquidation of the Coleman Shipping Company, the holding firm that controls the actual business operations, and the bulk of the fortune is to be frozen for a period of 6 months. During this time, the company will be run by a board of trustees. At the end of 6 months, a final determination will be made regarding the control of the company based on the behavior and actions of the beneficiaries. That's ridiculous, Brenda shouted. I'm the wife, I should control the company. The board controls the company, Mr. Pines corrected, and the board will be observing. The final inheritance, the control of Coleman Shipping valued at approximately $60 million, will be awarded at a hearing in 6 months, presided over by the Honorable Judge Anthony P. Moretti. Judge Moretti. Brenda paled. He's difficult. He is fair, Mr. Pines said. He closed the folder. That concludes the reading. Brenda stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked at Lysander with pure venom. 6 months, fine. I can play the grieving widow for 6 months. But mark my words, Lysander. You take your 10 grand and your trash heap warehouse and you get out of my life. If I see you near the mansion, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Lysander stood up. She felt hollowed out. She looked at Mr. Pines, hoping for some sign, some explanation. But the lawyer was busy packing his briefcase. Here is the check for 10,000, Lysander, Mr. Pines said, sliding a paper across the table. And the deed to the warehouse. And the key to the safety deposit box. Lysander took them. Thank you, Mr. Pines. Lysander, Pines said softly, as Brenda and Jared argued with their lawyer near the door. Your father loved you very much. He had a funny way of showing it, Lysander murmured. He was a man who played chess, my dear, not checkers. Remember that. Lysander left the office, dazed. She walked out into the Seattle drizzle. She had lost her home. She had lost her father. She had $10,000 to survive and a warehouse she couldn't afford to fix. Brenda and Jared drove past her in the limo, splashing water onto her legs. Jared rolled down the window. Hey, Lyd, he shouted. Need a job? I think the warehouse needs a janitor. They sped off, laughing. Lysander clutched the envelope against her chest. She had 6 months. 6 months of probation before the real decision was made. But she had no resources, no allies, and no home. She got into her car and looked at the address for the warehouse. 892 Oak Street. She had nowhere else to go. She drove to the industrial district. The building was old red brick with boarded-up windows and graffiti on the doors. It sat in the shadow of the new skyscrapers rising around it. It looked abandoned. Lysander unlocked the heavy steel door and pushed it open. It smelled of dust and oil. The space was massive, empty and cold. But in the center of the vast empty floor, there was a single chair, and on the chair sat a small wooden box. Lysander walked toward it, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She reached the chair. The box was locked. She looked at the key ring Mr. Pines had given her. There was the safety deposit key, the warehouse key, and a tiny silver key she hadn't noticed before. She inserted the silver key into the box. It turned with a satisfying click. She opened the lid. Inside there was no money. There were no diamonds. There was a single cassette tape and a folded letter written in her father's shaky handwriting. To Lysander it read, If you are reading this, then Brenda has taken the house and Jared has taken the cars. They think they have won. They think I left you nothing but a ruin. But you know the shipping business better than anyone, Lyd. You listened when I talked about routes and tariffs, while they talked about vacations. You know that a ship is only as good as its anchor. This warehouse isn't just a building. Look at the zoning map in the safety deposit box. Look at where the new high-speed rail line is being built next year. And the tape. The tape is for Judge Moretti, but do not play it yet. You must wait. Let them show him who they really are. Let them spend. Let them gloat. Silence is your weapon, Lysander. Use it. Lysander looked around the cold, dark warehouse. A slow warmth began to spread in her chest. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a player in the game. And it was her turn to move. The first week in the warehouse was a lesson in humility. There was no heating, only a sputtering industrial space heater Lysander bought from a pawn shop. She slept on a cot in the corner of the small office overlooking the main floor, washing her face in the utility sink with water that smelled faintly of rust. But while Brenda was busy ordering Italian marble for the mansion's foyer, Lysander was busy studying. She took the key to the safety deposit box to First National Bank on a Tuesday morning. The bank manager, Mr. Henderson, looked at her with pity when she walked in. He had known Andrew for years. "Lysander," he said gently, "I heard about the will. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Lysander said, her voice firm. "My father knew what he was doing." She was led to the private vault. When she opened the long metal box, she found the documents Andrew had promised. They weren't bearer bonds or cash. They were blueprints. Specifically, city planning blueprints, stamped confidential, City Infrastructure Project, Phase 4. She unfolded the large map on the viewing table. Her finger traced the red line cutting through the city's industrial district. It was a proposed high-speed freight rail line designed to connect the deep-water port directly to the interstate distribution centers. The line ran straight through the city blocks. It cut through parking lots, through abandoned factories, and through empty lots. But right in the center, creating a choke point that the engineers couldn't route around without spending billions on bridges, was 892 Oak Street, her warehouse. Andrew had circled the property in red ink. Next to it, he had written, "The Iron Corridor." They can't build around it. They have to go through it. Hold the line. Lysander sat back, a smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. The warehouse wasn't a ruin. It was a toll booth. Once the city announced the project publicly in the spring, the land value wouldn't be in the thousands. It would be in the millions. But there was a catch. She checked the date on the project proposal. The City Council was voting on the final route in 5 months, exactly 1 month before Judge Moretti was due to make his final ruling on the Coleman Shipping Company. If she sold the land now, she'd be rich, but the company, her father's legacy, would be lost to Brenda and Jared. If she held on to it, she had to survive 5 months of poverty while maintaining the property to code so the city wouldn't condemn it before the vote. She locked the box and left the bank. As she walked to her car, she saw a familiar figure sitting on a park bench, looking despondent. It was Frank Miller. He had been Coleman Shipping's operations manager for 20 years. He was the man who made sure the ships ran on time. He was currently holding a cardboard box filled with desk plants and framed photos. Lysander stopped. "Frank." Frank looked up, his face grey and tired. "Lysander, good to see you. What happened? Why do you have your things?" Frank laughed bitterly. "Efficiency cuts. That's what Jared called it. He said my salary was bloated and that an algorithm could route the ships better than I could. He fired me, Lysander. 20 years, and he gave me 20 minutes to pack." Lysander felt a cold rage settle in her stomach. Who else? Most of the senior logistics team. The maintenance head, Sarah. The dockmaster, Bill. Jared replaced us with a third-party contracting firm owned by one of his fraternity buddies. They're gutting the soul of the company to save a few % on the bottom line. Lysander looked at the warehouse key in her hand. She thought about the vast, empty space at 892 Oak Street. "Frank," she said, "how much do you trust me?" "Your father was the best man I ever knew," Frank said. "You're his daughter. I trust you." "I have a warehouse," Lysander said. "It's empty. It's cold. I have no capital, and I can't pay you what you were making. But I need to run a logistics hub, just a small one. Specialized cargo, high-value short-term storage for clients who need discretion and care things an algorithm can't handle." Frank stood up, adjusting his glasses. "You want to start a rival company?" "No," Lysander said. "I want to save the reputation of the Coleman name. When Jared messes up, and he will, the clients are going to need somewhere to go. I want to be there to catch them." Frank looked at the determination in her eyes. He smiled a genuine, crinkly-eyed smile. "I'll call Sarah and Bill. We're not doing anything else." "I can't pay you yet," she warned. "Lysander," Frank said, extending his hand. "We'll get paid when we win. Let's get to work." 3 months passed. The rain in Seattle turned to a biting wet chill. But inside the warehouse on Oak Street, the atmosphere was electric. Lysander, Frank, Sarah, and Bill had transformed the derelict space. They used pallets and salvaged racking to create a highly organized storage system. They didn't have the massive fleet of Coleman shipping. But they had something Jared didn't: expertise. Word had spread quietly among the old clients, the art dealers, the antique importers, the specialty electronics manufacturers. If you want your cargo treated like garbage, use Coleman. If you want it treated like gold, go to Oak Street. Lysander worked 18-hour days. She drove the forklift, she managed the books, and she negotiated contracts. She was exhausted, her hands were calloused, and she wore the same 3 outfits in rotation. But she had never felt more alive. Meanwhile, up on Skyline Drive, the atmosphere was very different. Brenda sat in the drawing room of the mansion, staring at a spreadsheet on her iPad. The numbers were red. Deep red. "Jared!" she screamed. Jared wandered in, wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of scotch. It was 11:00 a.m. "What is it, Mother? I'm trying to relax. The stress of the CEO position is immense." "The stress?" Brenda threw a pillow at him. "Jared, we are hemorrhaging money. 3 major contracts cancelled this week. The Asian import deal fell through because the shipment was 3 days late." "What is going on?" Jared shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "It's the market, Mother. Global fluctuations. Plus the new contractors are working out the kinks. It's fine. We have the reserves." "We don't have the reserves," Brenda hissed. "I spent the liquid cash on the renovation and the summer home in the Hamptons. We are leveraged, Jared. If we don't show a profit by the time we face Judge Moretti, he might ask questions." "He won't," Jared scoffed. "He's a judge, not an accountant. As long as the company is standing, we get the inheritance. Then we can sell it all, take the 60 million, and live on an island." "I heard a rumor," Brenda said, her voice dropping. "I heard that the clients leaving us aren't just going to competitors. They're going to a boutique firm in the industrial district, some place called Oak Logistics." Jared laughed. "Oak. That's probably Lysander's dump. What's she doing storing cardboard boxes for homeless people?" "I want you to go down there," Brenda ordered. "See what she's doing. If she is violating the non-compete clause of the family trust, there is no non-compete clause for her mother. Remember, she got kicked out. Just go, Brenda screeched. Find dirt on her. Anything we can use to show the judge she's unstable, incompetent, or criminal. I want her buried. Jared rolled his eyes but grabbed his car keys. He took the Shelby Cobra, Andrew's favorite car. He drove it hard, revving the engine aggressively as he pulled up to the curb of 892 Oak Street. He expected to see a ruin. Instead, he saw a bustle of activity. A delivery truck was backing into the bay. 2 men in clean uniforms were loading crates. And there, standing by the bay door, holding a clipboard, was Lysander. She looked different. She wasn't the meek girl in the oversized coat anymore. She wore work boots, jeans, and a heavy flannel shirt. Her hair was tied back in a severe, practical bun. She looked strong. Jared stepped out of the car, slamming the door. He walked over, stepping intentionally into a puddle to splash mud onto the loading ramp. "Well, well," Jared sneered. Playing shopkeeper lid, Lysander didn't look up from her clipboard. "You're blocking the loading zone, Jared. Move the car." "Or what?" Jared laughed. "You'll tow me with your bicycle." "Look at this place. It smells like sweat and desperation. Mother is worried you're stealing clients, but I told her you're just playing in the dirt." Frank Miller stepped out from the shadows of the warehouse. He crossed his arms over his chest. He was a large man. "Is there a problem here, Ms. Coleman?" Frank asked. Jared blanched. "Miller." "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be unemployed." "I'm working for a real boss now," Frank said evenly. Jared turned back to Lysander, his face reddening. "You hired the rejects." "That's pathetic. You know we're going to crush you. The moment I get full control in 3 months, I'm going to buy this block and bulldoze this warehouse, just for the view." Lysander finally looked up. Her eyes were cold, hard flint. "You can try," she said softly. "But you might want to check your tire pressure, to Jared. You're driving on dangerous ground." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. Go home, Jared. The adults are working." Jared spluttered, searching for a comeback, but found none. He spun around, marched back to the Cobra, and peeled away tires, screeching. Lysander watched him go. Frank stood beside her. "He's scared," Frank noted. "He should be," Lysander said. "Did the letter from the city council arrive?" "It did," Frank said, handing her an envelope. "They want to schedule a meeting regarding eminent domain and property valuation for next week." Lysander took the letter. The game was escalating. The city wanted her land for the rail line. They would offer her a fair price, maybe $2 million. If she took the money, she would be safe. She could walk away from Brenda and Jared and never look back. But the tape. She remembered the tape in the safety deposit box. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "The check comes at the end of the meal." "Frank," Lysander said, "reply to the city. Tell them I'm not selling yet. Tell them I'm waiting for the market to mature." "That's risky, Lysander. If they condemn the building—" "They won't," she said. "Not while I have the zoning loophole Dad found. But I need to stall them until the hearing with Judge Moretti." Just then Lysander's phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. "Hello, Lysander Coleman." The voice was deep, authoritative. "Yes." "This is Judge Anthony Moretti's clerk. The judge has ordered an early status conference. He has received reports of financial irregularities regarding the Coleman estate. He wants to see all beneficiaries in his chambers tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Lysander's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll be there." She hung up. "What is it?" Frank asked. "The judge," Lysander said. He's watching. Frank looked at the work they had done. Are we ready? Lysander looked at the bustling warehouse, then at the letter from the city, and finally at the dirty street where Jared had spun his tires. No, she said. But we don't have a choice. Prepare the ledgers, Frank. I'm going to show the judge exactly what $10,000 can do. The judge's chambers smelled of old mahogany and pipe tobacco, a stark contrast to the sterile glass-walled conference room where the will had first been read. Judge Anthony Moretti sat behind a massive desk that seemed to swallow the room. He was a man of few words, known in the circuit for his summary judgments that left lawyers trembling. He didn't use a gavel. His voice was heavy enough. Brenda and Jared sat on one side of the aisle, looking like royalty who had been forced to wait at the DMV. Brenda was checking her makeup in a compact mirror, while Jared tapped furiously on his phone, likely trying to liquidate stocks to cover the month's losses before the judge saw them. Lysander sat alone on the other side. She wore her work clothes clean but worn. She hadn't had time to change. "You're late, Mr. Croker," Judge Moretti rumbled as Brenda's lawyer hurried in, sweating. "Apologies, Your Honor. Traffic." "Sit," Moretti commanded. He opened a thick file folder. "I called this status conference because the court-appointed auditor has flagged several concern areas regarding the Coleman estate." Brenda sat up straighter, forcing a smile. "I assure you, Judge, it's just growing pains. The transition from my late husband's antiquated methods to our modern approach has capital costs." "Capital costs," Moretti repeated. He picked up a sheet of paper. "Mrs. Coleman, according to this, you have liquidated $3 million in bonds to pay for consulting fees to a company called J-Corp Solutions, a company registered to—" He peered over his glasses at Jared. "A Mr. Jared's fraternity brother." Jared turned a shade of crimson. "That's a legitimate logistics firm. They're modernizing our fleet tracking. They are a shell company with a P.O. box in the Caymans," Moretti said, his voice flat. "And they have produced 0 deliverables." The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed loudly. "That money," Moretti continued, "is technically part of the estate's principal. You are spending the inheritance before you have inherited it." "We have the right to manage operations," Brenda argued shrilly. "Andrew wanted us to run the company." "He wanted the board to run it," Moretti corrected. "And the board reports that you fired the entire senior staff. Profit margins are down 40% in 3 months. Coleman Shipping is bleeding Mrs. Coleman." He turned his gaze to Lysander. His expression softened just a fraction. "And you, Miss Coleman, the auditor tells me you have not touched your $10,000. "I used it, Your Honor," Lysander said clearly. "I invested it." "Invested?" Jared snorted. "In what lotto tickets?" Lysander reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a simple, spiral-bound ledger. She walked up to the bench and handed it to the judge. "I used the capital to perform necessary repairs on the property at 892 Oak Street to bring it up to code. I then utilized the remaining funds to secure insurance for high-value short-term storage. I hired the staff that Coleman Shipping released." Moretti flipped through the ledger. His eyebrows went up. "You're turning a profit?" "Small," Lysander admitted, "but consistent. We are operating at near capacity. Our overhead is low because we do the work ourselves." "She's stealing our clients," Jared shouted, jumping to his feet. "That's where our money is going. She's poaching them." "Sit down, son," Moretti snapped. "Clients leave because of poor service, not because they are stolen. This ledger shows no solicitation. These are inbound inquiries." The judge closed the book and handed it back to Lysander. He looked at Brenda and Jared with a look of profound disappointment. "You have 3 months left," Moretti said. if the valuation of Coleman shipping drops another 10%. I will invoke the fiduciary negligence clause and remove you from the premises immediately. Do you understand? You can't do that, Brenda gasped. I can, Moretti said. And I will. Andrew Coleman built that company with sweat. I won't let you dismantle it with champagne. Get out of my chambers. As they walked out into the hallway, the tension was palpable. Brenda grabbed Jared's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. You told me the consulting fees were hidden, she hissed. They were, Jared whispered back. The auditor must have dug deep. Someone tipped them off. They both looked at Lysander, who was waiting for the elevator. Brenda marched over, her face twisted into a mask of pure hate. You think you're clever, don't you? Playing the poor little match girl for the judge. I'm just working Brenda, Lysander said calmly. You're a parasite, Brenda spat. But parasites can be crushed. You think your little warehouse matters. I'm going to make sure that by the time the final hearing comes, you don't have a roof over your head. I know the zoning laws. I know people at the city inspector's office. Enjoy your profit while you can. The elevator doors opened. Lysander stepped inside. I'll see you in 3 months, Lysander said. As the doors closed, she saw the fear behind Brenda's eyes. They were desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. The mistake happened 2 months later, exactly 30 days before the final hearing. It was a Tuesday. The rain had finally stopped, leaving Seattle under a rare, brilliant blue sky. Lysander was on the forklift moving a crate of vintage motorcycles for a collector when Frank came running out of the office. He was waving a newspaper. Lysander, stop! You need to see this. Lysander lowered the pallet and killed the engine. She jumped down, wiping grease from her hands. What is it? Frank slammed the paper onto a crate. The headline was bold and black. City approves. Iron Corridor, Rail Project Construction, begins immediately. Below the headline was a map that looked exactly like the one in Andrew's safety deposit box. A thick red line cut through the industrial district, connecting the port to the highway. And right in the center of the choke point was a red square, 892 Oak Street. They announced it, Frank breathed. The eminent domain hearings start next week. But look at the sub-clause. He pointed to a paragraph in fine print. Due to the urgent nature of the supply chain crisis, the city has authorized a fast-track purchase program. Owners of key properties along the route will be offered 300% of market value for immediate acquisition. If the property is a functioning logistics hub, the city is authorized to partner rather than purchase, leasing the land for a 99-year term at premium commercial rates. Lysander stared at the words. Functioning logistics hub. If she had just sat on the empty building, the city would have bought it for a flat fee, maybe $2 million, a nice sum. But because she had turned it into a working business, because she had Frank Sarah bill and a ledger full of clients, she wasn't just a landowner. She was a strategic partner. What does this mean? Sarah asked, looking over their shoulders. It means, Lysander said, her voice trembling slightly, that this building isn't worth $2 million. The lease agreement, it's worth $10 million, maybe 20 over the lifetime of the contract. Frank let out a whoop of joy. Andrew knew, the crazy old fox knew. The phone in the office began to ring. Then the fax machine started beeping. Then Lysander's cell phone buzzed. It's starting, Lysander said. The vultures are realizing what they missed. Up on Skyline Drive, the mood was funereal. Jared was pacing the living room, his hair disheveled. The floor was littered with financial papers. Brenda was on the phone, screaming at their lawyer. "What do you mean you didn't check the City Planning Commission records?" she shrieked. "That's your job. We gave that warehouse away. We literally gave it to her." She slammed the phone down, breathing hard. She turned to Jared. "We have to get it back." "How?" Jared asked, pouring himself a drink. His hand was shaking. "It's in her name. The deed is done." "The company." Brenda said, her eyes manic. "Coleman Shipping. The corporate charter has a clause about subsidiary reacquisition. If a former asset of the company is deemed vital to the survival of the parent corporation, the board can vote to forcefully buy it back at the original sale price." "But she owns it personally," Jared said. "She used Coleman employees," Brenda argued. "She's servicing Coleman clients. We can argue that she built the business using stolen Coleman intellectual property. We can sue her for the deed." "That will take years in court," Jared said. "We have the hearing with Judge Moretti in 4 weeks. "We don't need to win the lawsuit," Brenda said, a cold smile forming. "We just need to file it. If the property is under litigation, the city can't sign the contract with her. The deal freezes. She doesn't get the money. She looks incompetent to the judge. And then we offer to drop the lawsuit if she gives us the land in exchange for, I don't know, keeping the 10 grand. Jared looked at his mother. "That's evil." "That's business," Brenda corrected. "Get the car. We're going to pay Lysander a visit. We're going to make her an offer she can't refuse." They arrived at Oak Street at sunset. The warehouse was glowing with amber light against the darkening sky. Lysander was in the office reviewing the city's preliminary offer contract when the door banged open. Brenda swept in, followed by Jared and 2 men in suits, lawyers, from an aggressive corporate firm, not Mr. Pines. "Get out," Lysander said, not looking up. "You're trespassing." "We're here to negotiate," Brenda said, slamming a thick legal document onto the desk. "This is a cease and desist order, and a lawsuit for theft of trade secrets, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty." Lysander looked at the papers. "You're suing me for working. We're suing you for building a business on the back of my company." Brenda lied smoothly. "Jared, tell her." Jared stepped forward, looking smug again. "We know about the rail deal, Lyd. Nice try. But with this lawsuit filed, the city won't touch you. They can't sign a lease with a property under active litigation. You'll miss the fast-track window. You'll get nothing." Lysander stood up. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 6:00 p.m. "You're right," Lysander said softly. "The city hates litigation." "Exactly," Brenda said, crossing her arms. "So here is the deal. You sign the deed over to Coleman Shipping tonight. We withdraw the lawsuit. We give you $50,000. You walk away. And if I don't, then we drag this out for 5 years, Brenda threatened. "You'll go bankrupt paying legal fees. The warehouse will rot, and Judge Moretti will see you as a thief who got sued by her own family." Lysander looked at them. She looked at the greed etching lines into Brenda's own face. She looked at the weakness in Jared's eyes. She walked over to the safe in the corner of the office. "What are you doing?" Jared asked nervously. Lysander opened the safe and took out the small cassette tape. She held it up. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. "More garbage from your father." Brenda scoffed. "Dad left this for me," Lysander said. "He said to play it for the judge. But he didn't say I couldn't play it for you first." She walked over to an old cassette player on the shelf and clicked the tape in. "I don't have time for games," Brenda snapped. "Sign the papers." Lysander pressed play. The sound of static filled the room, followed by Andrew Coleman's voice. It was clear, strong recorded years ago, long before he got sick. Testing, testing. Andrew Coleman here. Date is November 12th, 2019. I am currently in my home office. Brenda is in the living room. She thinks I'm at the doctor. I'm leaving this recording because I need proof. Brenda's face went white. 2019. That was 6 years ago. I've just discovered the transfers. Andrew's voice continued. Brenda has been moving money from the offshore accounts into a shell company under Jared's name. J-Corp Solutions. She's been forging my signature on the authorizations. I have the bank records in my hand. She's stealing from the company to pay off Jared's gambling debts in Vegas. If I confront her now, she'll deny it. I need to build the case. The tape clicked off. Lysander pressed stop. The silence in the office was deafening. The two lawyers Brenda had brought with her were slowly backing away toward the door. That's a fake, Brenda whispered. Her voice was barely a squeak. That's AI. That's manipulated. It's an analog tape, Brenda, Lysander said coldly. Authenticated by Mr. Pines. It's been in a safety deposit box since the day he died. Dad knew you were stealing for years. He just couldn't prove where the money was going until you got sloppy. Lysander leaned forward, placing her hands on the desk. You filed a lawsuit against me today. Good. That makes it public record. But if you don't walk out of here right now, and I mean right now, I will send a copy of this tape to the district attorney before the sun comes up. Brenda looked at the tape player. She looked at Jared, who was hyperventilating. You wouldn't, Brenda said. It would ruin the family name. You already ruined the name, Lysander said. I'm just taking out the trash. We'll drop the suit, Jared stammered, pulling at his collar. Mother, let's go. We have to go. The hearing is in 4 weeks, Lysander said to their retreating backs. Bring your checkbook. As the door slammed shut, Frank stepped out from the back room where he had been listening. He let out a long, low whistle. You had that card the whole time, Frank asked. The loudest man in the room is the one with the most to hide, Lysander quoted. Dad was right. So, Frank smiled. We're not selling. No, Lysander said, looking at the city lights through the window. We're going to court, and we're going to take everything. The day of the final hearing arrived with the weight of a storm front. The courtroom was packed. Rumors of the Coleman family feud had leaked to the press, likely thanks to Frank's strategic whispers to a few business journalists. The gallery was filled with former employees, curious onlookers, and business rivals, waiting to see if the Coleman empire would crumble. Judge Anthony Moretti entered the room, his black robes billowing like storm clouds. He didn't look at the audience. He looked straight at the 3 people sitting at the plaintiff and defense tables. Brenda wore black, a somber attempt to look like a grieving widow, but the diamonds at her throat betrayed her. Jared looked like a man walking to the gallows. He was pale, sweating, and refused to make eye contact with anyone. Lysander sat with Mr. Pines. She wore a crisp navy suit purchased with her own earnings. She didn't look down. She looked up at the bench, ready. We are here, Judge Moretti announced, to settle the matter of the Coleman estate. 6 months ago, a challenge was issued. Today, we measure the results. He opened the heavy binder in front of him. Let us begin with the primary asset, Coleman Shipping Company, managed by Mrs. Brenda Coleman and Miss Jared Coleman. Moretti took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The silence stretched until it was painful. In 6 months, the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet, the company's stock value has dropped 42%. 3 major lawsuits have been filed against the firm for breach of contract, and the employee retention rate has plummeted to single digits. He looked at Brenda. Mrs. Coleman, you petitioned this court to grant you control based on your experience. Is this the experience you referred to? Brenda stood up, her voice trembling with practiced outrage. Your Honor, we were sabotaged. The market conditions were impossible, and Lysander. She poached our clients. She undermined us from the outside. Sabotage? Moretti asked. We will get to that. Now let us look at the secondary asset, the property at 892 Oak Street, managed by Ms. Lysander Coleman. A murmur went through the gallery. Ms. Coleman, the judge said, you started with $10,000 and a condemned building. According to the independent audit, you have secured a 99-year lease agreement with the City Infrastructure Project. You have also generated a net profit of $200,000 in short-term logistics operations in just 6 months. The judge leaned forward. The valuation of your asset, the one your stepmother called a trash heap, is now estimated at $18 million. Jared let out a choked sound, burying his face in his hands. Success is not just about luck, Mrs. Coleman, Moretti said to Brenda. It is about stewardship. Ms. Coleman took a ruin and built a fortress. You took a fortress and turned it into a ruin. It doesn't matter, Brenda screamed, losing her composure. The will says the spouse gets 50%. You can't take my share. The law is the law. Ah, yes, Moretti said. The law. Mr. Pines, please step forward. Geoffrey Pines stood up, clutching the cassette tape Lysander had given him. He walked to the bench and handed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, Pines said, we submit into evidence item Exhibit A, a recording made by the deceased Andrew Coleman, authenticated by forensic audio specialists. Objection, Brenda's lawyer shouted. This is a surprise introduction of evidence. Overruled, Moretti snapped. This is a probate hearing, not a criminal trial. I want the truth. Play the tape. The bailiff pressed play. Andrew's voice filled the cavernous room, echoing off the high ceilings. Brenda has been moving money from the offshore accounts, forging my signature, J-Corp Solutions, stealing from the company. The color drained from Brenda's face so completely she looked like a corpse. The gallery erupted in whispers. Moretti listened to the entire tape. His face was stone. When it finished, he looked at Brenda with an expression of absolute disgust. Embezzlement, Moretti said. Fraud. Elder abuse. It's not true, Brenda shrieked. He was senile. He didn't know what he was saying. I have the bank records to match the tape, Your Honor, Lysander said, standing up. She placed a stack of documents on the table, traced by the forensic accountant I hired with my first month's profits. Moretti flipped through the documents. He nodded once, sharp and final. Andrew Coleman's will contained a conduct clause, Moretti stated. It dictates that any beneficiary found to have acted against the interests of the estate forfeits their claim. Mrs. Coleman, you didn't just act against the estate. You looted it. He raised his voice, booming over Brenda's sobbing. It is the judgment of this court that Brenda Coleman and Jared Coleman are hereby stripped of all claims to the Coleman fortune. Furthermore, I am forwarding this evidence to the district attorney's office. Bailiffs, please detain Mrs. Coleman and her son, pending immediate fraud charges. No, you can't, Jared yelled as 2 officers grabbed his arms. I didn't do it. It was her. It was all her. Save it for the jury, son, Moretti said. Brenda didn't scream as they handcuffed her. She just stared at Lysander. Her eyes were empty, the fire finally extinguished. She looked old. She looked defeated. As they were dragged out of the courtroom, silence returned. Judge Moretti looked at Lysander. He smiled a genuine warm smile. The court awards the entirety of the Coleman estate, the shipping company, the mansion, the cars and the accounts to the sole beneficiary, Lysander Coleman. He closed the binder. Your father told me once that he was worried about you, Lysander. He thought you were too quiet. He thought you wouldn't fight. Lysander looked at the empty spot where her stepmother had stood. I didn't need to fight your honor, she said. I just needed to wait for the check to come. 6 months later. The rain was back, but inside the Coleman shipping headquarters. It was warm. The offices had been renovated. The efficiency algorithms were gone. Frank Miller was back in his corner office, serving as VP of Operations. Lysander sat at her father's massive oak desk. She had recovered the journals from the dumpster that first day. They were now lined up on the shelf behind her, restored and bound. She signed the final document of the day, a donation authorization. She was turning the mansion on Skyline Drive into a transitional housing facility for families who had lost everything. She couldn't live there. It had too many ghosts. She preferred the small apartment she had built above the warehouse on Oak Street. She liked the sound of the trains passing by on the new iron corridor. They sounded like progress. They sounded like victory. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jared. He was out on bail awaiting trial working at a car wash. He wanted money. Lysander deleted the message without reading it. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the grey waters of the Puget Sound. A massive container ship, painted with the Coleman logo, was cutting through the waves heading out to sea. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the girl in the corner. She was the captain. And the silence. The silence wasn't her hiding place anymore. It was the peace of a storm that had finally passed. And that is the story of how Lysander Coleman turned $10,000 and a rusty key into an empire, proving that sometimes the quietest people are the ones you should be most afraid of. Andrew Coleman knew the truth. You don't win by shouting the loudest. You win by holding the best cards and waiting for the right moment to play them. Brenda and Jared learned the hard way that greed is a loan with very high interest, and eventually the bill always comes due. What would you have done if you were Lysander? Would you have taken the money and run, or would you have stayed to fight for your father's legacy? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy drama coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket in a place no one would ever look. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.